How's it going, everybody? CJ here, back with another video. We're doing a first thoughts today. This first thoughts is on Judith, Carnage Connoisseur. This card seems insane, extremely unfun to play against. It's going to be very powerful as a commander. The categories I want to talk about today are burn, first of all. There's a lot of really good burn cards that you can get lifelink from and give death touch to and kill everything, and that seems awesome and gain a ton of life. Love that. Then we're going to be talking about some death trigger cards because a lot of your opponent's creatures will be dying over and over and over again. Some cast triggers because you're going to be casting a lot of instants and sorceries, so you want to get as much benefit as you can from that. Some cards that benefit when you gain life because you'll be doing a lot of that as well. After that, we'll move on to cards that work well with that second trigger of, instead of death touch and lifelink, creating a token. And there's a lot of cards that work well with that. They're going to talk about some instants and sorceries that let you sacrifice tokens to cast, so there's sack outlets that also make tokens, so that seems pretty good. We'll talk about some additional cards that work well with creatures dying, but this time specifically your creatures dying. Then I'll mention some cards that protect Judith because she's going to be a big target, and there's a lot of good instants and sorceries in black to protect her that work really well with the theme of this deck because you'll get death triggers still. Love that. And lastly, we'll talk about some one-off cards and some good instants and sorceries just pop into this deck because they just get better with the upside of Judith. So let's get this going, starting off with the burn stuff. I first want to mention cards that just destroy all creatures your opponents control when you have Judith in play because they deal at least 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, and you can give it death touch and then boom, everything's dying. So some of those cards include Aggravate, Barrage of Boulders, Blazing Volley, awesome, only 1 mana, it's crazy, Boiling Earth, Cosmotronic Wave, Electrickery, Fang Dragon, which has a little extra utility, Scouring Sands, Seismic Wave, Smash to Dust, and Tectonic Hazard. Along with those is a handful of instants and sorceries that can deal 1 damage to multiple targets, and you choose those targets. Some of those include Arc Trail, Amethyst Dragon, which has the utility of being a creature, Arc Lightning, Avacyn's Judgment, which can also just be a big spell if you need it to be, Chandra's Pyrohelix, Dual Shot, and Fear Fire Bows. Along with those, there's a few other burn spells I wanted to mention purely for their utility. Some of those are Abrade, Brotherhood End, Cast into Fire, a lot of these just destroy artifacts as well, Fiery Confluence, K-Command, and Spikefield Hazard. Since Judith not only gives death touch but also lifelink, some big damage dealing burn spells also seem fantastic for this deck. Cards like Blasphemous Act, Bonfire of the Damned, Earthquake, Rolling Earthquake, and Star of Extinction can gain you a ton of life and just wipe the board or deal a ton of damage to players. If you're running all this death touch burn, a lot of your opponent's creatures are going to be dying. They're going to have a hard time making a board state. Lots of stuff just over and over death. So that means a lot of death triggers. So you're going to want to have cards that trigger when creatures die. You've got cards like Black Market, making a ton of mana, Blood Artist, along with Dingus Staff, Dreadhound, Massacre Worm, and Sir Conrad to deal damage, Burning Sands, Cordial Vampire, which at its worst is 2 mana, gets really, really big, but you're going to have a lot of other vampires in this deck because vampires seem to like it when things die. Ghoulish Procession, Grave Betrayal, steal everything, Harvester of Souls to draw tons of cards, Camber, Lorcan, Morbid Opportunist, Obnixilis, Ogre Slumlord to make a bunch of rats, Mahadi and Revel in Riches and Spiteful Banditry for treasure production, and Revel in Riches as an alternate win con, and Weatherlight Completed. This deck's going to be all about casting instants and sorceries, so you're going to want to have cards that trigger when you cast an instant and sorcery. So you could throw in Erebor Flamesmith, Firebrand Archer, Fiery Inscription, Gutter Snipe, Kessig Flame Breather, lots of cards to just deal damage to your opponents. Thermo Alchemist is in that same vein, along with Electrostatic Field, Urabrask, Sedgemoor Witch, and Stormkiln Artist. Weirdly enough, you'll be gaining a lot of life with this deck. Most of your burn spells are also just going to gain you life. So you're going to want to have a lot of cards that work well with the life gain. You can throw in cards like Tivish, Witch of the Moors, and Vain Witch Coven, Well of Lost Dreams, big card draw, Sanguine Bond to really burn out your opponents, along with Veto. Now let's talk some more about that second ability. Making a 2/2 token that when it dies deals 2 damage to any target is also very powerful, and there's a lot of good cards that work with that. So you're going to want to throw in a lot of instants and sorceries that are also sack outlets, that way you can replace the token when you sacrifice it. There's a lot of really good cards to do this, and many of them also draw you cards. There's Altar's Reap, Blood Divination, Costly Plunder, Corrupted Conviction, Deadly Dispute, Fanatical Offering, Nasty End, Plumb the Forbidden, Village Rites, Reckoner's Bargain, and Rowan's Grim Search, along with Culling the Weak for mana production, Diabolic Intent, just an awesome tutor, and Victimize, one of my favorite reanimation cards. Along with those, you can throw in a lot of the typical sack outlets, including the Altars, Goblin Bombardment, and Viscera Seer. When you lean more into this route, you can add in a few other cards that trigger when creatures die, but specifically when your creatures die. So, you can throw in cards like Mayhem Devil. You're going to be sacrificing a lot of things. That seems awesome. Mirkwood Bats. You're making all these tokens, dealing a ton of damage that way. Pitiless Plunderer for some more treasures. Grave Pact to even further destroy your opponent's board states. And Dark Prophecy. As I said before, Judith is going to be a massive target because your opponents can't really build a board state when Judith is in play, because they could always just get their board wiped for 1 mana. So you're going to want to keep Judith around. There's a lot of ways to prevent her from dying. Most of these cards work specifically with dying, not really exile, but they're just so worth it. It seems like they're auto-includes in this deck. You have cards like Not Dead After All, Malakir Rebirth, which is nice because it's also a land, Supernatural Stamina, Feign Death, Undying Malice, and Fake Your Own Death. Now let's talk about the one-off cards. There's a lot of cards that just have strong synergies in this deck that should be worth looking into. You have cards like Chandra's Incinerator and Virtue of Courage for dealing non-combat damage and getting extra triggers that way. Command the Dreadhorde. It actually deals damage to you, not life loss. So Judith giving it lifelink means you can just reanimate everything, take a ton of damage, and gain it all back immediately. Judith could be a very cool Dragon's Approach deck. Making it so all your Dragon's Approaches have Death Touch and lifelink seems pretty interesting, and also being able to create tokens if you need to. Flame Jab is just recurable burn, which is nice. Gut Shot, 0 mana burn. Drivnod works fantastic with all of these death triggers. Sword of Once and Future, you're going to be playing a lot of low mana cost instants and sorceries. This can recast them from your graveyard, which is pretty nice. Lich's Mastery, turn your burn into card draw. Seems kind of fun, high risk, high reward kind of card. Lagomos will very easily be online to search your library, but also just pump out tokens that you can also sacrifice. And Solfim to increase the amount of damage you're dealing. That is everything I have for Judith, Carnage Connoisseur. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, everybody.